Hello, class. We will take on a few meta narratives in the Bible. Meta narratives, as you have seen in the syllabus, are the major stories that hold the Bible together, that undergird it, if you want to put it like that. We will start from the story of the critical, very important figure called Noah. If you go back a little bit to the introduction, you would see we passed through the story of Adam and Eve. Now we are talking about Noah, one of their descendants. As the world continued to move forward, there was a time, or there came a time, that the world was filled with violence, what we know in contemporary parlance as sin, that is wrongdoing. A rises against B, B rises against C. But even though this was the trend throughout the world, there was one man who led a more disciplined life, who led a life of not rising up against his neighbors. His name was called Noah. That God decided to possibly see if he could save mankind by asking that man Noah to preach to the rest of humanity to see if they would improve. Basically, he was ignored. He preached for a very long time, but people did not listen to him. Ultimately, God told him to make an ark. An ark is like a ship, and to take pairs of all the things he created and put in that ark, and to, of course, live in that ark or enter into that ark with his family. He had 3 sons and, of course, his wife. He did what God commanded him. After, God sent ceaseless rain on the world, and everything, of course, apart from Noah and the pair of all the creations of God, everything was drowned apart from Noah and the things that Noah had put in the ark. After so many days of rain, Noah decided to check and see if the rains had stopped. He sent out some birds. When one of the birds did not return, that was to him confirmation that the rains had stopped. And man began to develop again from the sons of Noah. Those 3 sons of Noah. The rest were swept off. In some literatures, this is called the deluge. Man continued to develop again. The next critical character, the next most important character we will encounter was the one called Abraham. Abraham became the father of the people we call the Israelites today. You would know them mainly as Jews today because that's the most used identity in most parts of the world. Abraham and his brothers were born in a place called Ur of the Chaldeans. Their father was a man called Terah. That God that created humanity did not leave humanity, or rather he did not abandon humanity. What he did was to still keep on looking for ways to work with with his creations. So after Abraham had become a matured person, the voice of that God came to him and told him to leave his father's house, the place where he was born, take his wife and move. He moved with his nephew called Lot and the wife called Sarai. By the way, at this time, Abraham's name was Abram. God told him that he wanted to use him to improve mankind. In other words, this man will be a flashpoint that other humans will emulate. And he did exactly what God told him to do. Interestingly, this man at a very advanced age did not have children, and he was worried by this. But interestingly, again, he was faithful to that voice he had, the voice of that God. So he did exactly what that God commanded, moved to another land called the land of Canaan. A lot of things happened along the way. Like at a stage, the wife got frustrated and told him to basically take her servant as his second wife, which he did, and the son called Ishmael was produced. But ultimately, his wife, I am talking about people that are nearly 100 years, that wife Sarai conceived. And by then their names had changed. God had changed their names from Abram to Abraham and Sarai to Sarah. She conceived and bore another son called a son called Ishmael. So Abraham had two sons now, the one from the Egyptian woman and the one from Sarah, his wife, whom he called Isaac. And Isaac became the father of Esau and Jacob. Jacob turned out to be the Israelites. The Israelites produced the groups known as the Igbos. You may not know this group because they have been hidden away in Africa for a very long time. The group you know as the Jews, another group you know as the Samaritans, another group you know as the Karaites. The Jews would include the people we know as the Ethiopian Jews. They were called Falashas and Beta Israel at a point. So the story continued through the life of Isaac. Eventful but not as colorful and as eventful as the life of his father Abraham. Isaac produced two sons, Esau and Jacob. As I said earlier, Jacob became the Israelite, became Israel, whom his children became the Israelites. He produced 12 sons. You might have heard of the 12 tribes of Israel. They were the sons of Jacob. As you read as you would see in the Bible, when you continue to do your readings, this family at a point found itself in Egypt because there was famine all over the world. But prior to this, some critical things had happened, like there was a falling out in the family, and in anger, some of the brothers sold off one of their brother who was called Joseph. So he was sold to some merchants who eventually sold him to some Egyptians. But it seemed as if much was not happening again until famine came, and when they entered Egypt to buy food, they met that brother they had sold as the governor of Egypt, under just one step below Pharaoh, the ruler of Egypt. And you will find the details in the Bible. But at the time of Joseph, who rehabilitated them by asking the entire family to stay with him in Egypt, these people who were at that point called Hebrews were an honored people in Egypt. They were respected because their brother was the governor. And life continued with this family until that generation died. Meanwhile, communication with that God still continued. They continued to develop relations with that God of creation who interacted with their father Abraham, with their father Isaac, and with their father Jacob. After this generation that went to Egypt died, the family, we basically did not hear much about them again until much later, many years after. The Bible says that a Pharaoh arose in Egypt who did not remember that Joseph that became governor. You would find the details of how he became governor, what he did to save Egypt and the world for that matter, because Egypt was like what the United States is in the world today, the most important country in the world. So the steps he took made life easier for Egyptians and for other peoples that had to come to Egypt to buy food, to name specifically what he did so that you have context when you go into the Bible. A Pharaoh arose who did not know him and decided to make life comfortable for these people who were at that point called Hebrews, because by the way they got the identity Hebrews from their ancestor Abraham, who was called Abram the Hebrew. They got that identity from him. This Pharaoh enacted all sorts of laws to whittle down these people, not just to destroy their reputation, but to possibly exterminate them as a people. And remember, they entered Egypt as, would we say strangers? They were not citizens. But they had been there for hundreds of years, so they were entitled to the rights of citizens. But Pharaoh did not bother, and at a point they had to cry out to that God that interfaced and interacted with Abraham, their ancestor. As all this was happening, a son was born into their community just when the oppression was at the highest, because Pharaoh had given laws that every child born to these people, every son born to these people was to be thrown into the river Nile. A son was born to them. The name was Moses. You will find in the Bible how the mother tried to hide him away, but ultimately she could not hide him. So she kept him she told the sister, well, let us see what happens. The child was put in a basket and put in the river. And the sister was asked to wash and see what will happen. Pharaoh's daughter came to have her bath, saw the child, had pity, and said, probably this is the child of one of the Hebrews, and adopted the boy. Comely child, good-looking child. The sister said, came out from where she was hiding, and said, I could find somebody to take care of this child for you, and actually brought the mother of the child, who was called Moses. This Moses became the greatest prophet to rise not just in the lives of these people, but all humanity would say that he was the greatest, because which religion does not look up to this Moses? He eventually became not just the Israelite prophet, but the man that brought what we understand to be the Ten Commandments today, the only person to come very close to this creator that we find his stories all over the Bible. He had so many confrontations with Pharaoh, and ultimately succeeded in leading the Israelites out of that land that you may have heard about as the land of bondage. They were in bondage in Egypt. He led them out of that land, led them into the Sinai wilderness, where they drew very close to that God and became practically a nation. Because at this wilderness, they, as I said, came very close to this creator who passed to them all the traditions, all the laws, the religion, the culture, everything that they were supposed to use as a nation when they moved into that land that he promised their father Abraham. These traditions wound them into a nation. And at the end of his life, by the time he died, these people, at the time that Moses died, these people had become a nation ready to face life. And at this point, we will stop. Thank you.